So I'm happy to welcome you all back after of a break. I want to chat to you about a pair of gentlemen that appear quite a bit in the Torah, and that have a very, very, very strange history. And I want to go with you through the timeline of their appearances, and maybe together we'll come to the conclusion of how we assess them and try to understand some of the strange things. Um, their names are Datan and Aviram, and they don't. Well, let's start from the beginning. Let's start from the beginning. So, beginning of the parsha, what do we have? We have the Jews having just left Mitzrayim, and just as they are right at the beginning of this week's portion of Beshalach, right as they are, um, you know, escaping, suddenly they get this instruction, turn around and encamp before Piachirot, between Migdol and the sea, before Baal Tzifon, face the sea. And look, I don't know much about the topography or the geography of that part of Egypt, but apparently there's some huge boulders and rocks and mountainous areas that you cannot climb over. So basically, they put themselves into a dead end. And not only that, but they are creating the perception that they're lost, because who would kind of turn around and go down a dead end street when you're being pursued, which is very likely what they were suspecting. In fact, what actually happened when the Egyptians realized that this is what they'd done, made a U-turn, gone back, and driven down a one-way street. Then they said that this is the time to catch up with them, because the Egyptians suddenly realized the financial impact, the social impact, but mainly the financial impact. So yes, they were doing something quite strange. In fact, the Torah said, Pharaoh will save the Philistines of the Israelites. They have strained the land, the wilderness is closed on them, and I will stiffen Pharaoh's heart and he'll pursue them. Then they gain glory through Pharaoh and all his hosts. The Egyptians, he's going to go back for them. This is what he does. He takes, harnesses his horses, so to speak, gets his army together, and off they go with chariots, with horses, with infantry to try and retrieve the Jewish people because they're closed in. Okay, so the way this is written in the Torah, in the Hebrew here, the Amar Paro Livnei Yisrael. Literally, Pharaoh will say or said to the children of Israel, because that prefix, the lamed le, means to. So he's talking about the Jewish people. Clearly, he can't be speaking to the Jewish people because they're not there; they've gone. So Rashi, I think, it says this is Pharaoh speaking of the Israelites, and I think he brings proof that sometimes that prefix le, which is the same as el, to, can also mean about. And that's kind of the simple interpretation. One of the very early translators of the Torah is a commentary by the name of Yonatan ben Uziel. Yonatan ben Uziel was actually from the Mishnah era. Yonatan ben Uziel was around the time of the Tanaists. He's buried in the north of Israel near a place called Amuka. You may have heard of it, and people go daven at Amuka, particularly for a shidduch. That's one of the reasons people make those pilgrimages to Amuka. He translates the verse as follows. He says, "Livnei Israel" is to be understood as literally to the children of Israel. But which children of Israel are in Egypt? There aren't any. They've all escaped. So he said to Datan and Aviram, who had remained in Mitzrayim. So it seems that these two fellows, and we're going to see them crop up quite a bit in the life of Moshe, they they had remained behind in Egypt, which is a little bit complicated because we told, if you look at the very first verse in the parasha, is that the Jews went out of Egypt chamushim, which literally means armed. But Rashi says it actually means 1/5. In other words, 80% remain behind. But they didn't survive. Those who didn't want to leave Mitzrayim, it says in the Medrash, Rashi quotes it, they died during the darkness. So that wouldn't cause, any issues with the Egyptians. They may have noticed that there were fewer Jews than there were before, but that is how they, so they were. So those who didn't want to leave Egypt, they died. What exact proportion there was, well, we know that during darkness, a great number of Jews, remained behind for good because they didn't want to leave and they perished. So why at that time Aviram alive and actually kind of hanging out with Pharaoh and he's discussing with them what their co-religionists are doing. Well, they're sitting on the fence. They don't know whether they want to leave or they don't want to leave. How come they survive is the first major question we need to deal with. But then as we carry on reading, we found some amazing stuff. Here. It describes what we know is going to happen. Pharaoh is going to chase the Jewish people down that dead end, but miracles of miracles, surprise of surprises. The sea split. And this is in the opening chapter, second chapter of the Pasha, verse 22 of chapter 14. The Jewish people went through the sea on dry grounds. And the water were a wall on either side of them, right and left. The Egyptians follow them on, and they go into the sea right behind them. And then, Hashem says to Moshe, hold your arm out over the sea. The waters may come back upon the Egyptians, upon the chariots, upon the riders. Well, we know the consequences of that consequences are. And then in verse 27, Moshe holds his arm over the sea, and by daybreak the seas return to his normal state, and the Egyptians are trying to flee, but they can't, and they get hurled back into the sea, and that's the end of the Egyptians. But then look on the next verse. The water returned, covering the army, the Egyptians. Not one remained. And then this seemingly superfluous verse, the children of Israel walked on dry ground, but it's finished, it's over. They're out on the other side. The waters were a wall for them on their right and on their left. It seems almost like the sea split again after the Egyptians had died to allow, a second shift of passengers, referred to as Bnei Yisrael, and we've come across that very recently. Bnei Yisrael, an allusion to Datan and Aviram. So this is what happens, says the Medrash, and this is kind of absolutely, fascinating, mind-blowing that the sea split twice. First to let the first shift of the Jews through, then the Egyptians drowned, then the sea splits again to let these two characters out. Not very happily. But it does, because, God obviously commands it to, and it does what it has to. Datan and Aviram must have kind of followed along with the Egyptians, watched from the sidelines, and said, hey, look what happened to the Egyptian armies as opposed to the Jewish people who were saved. I think we want to actually go with them. This works for us. So they go to the edge of the sea, and strangely, the sea splits for them, which is, as I said, not very happily. If you look at the way this is written, it says that the walls were the water was a wall either side. That's the word choma, which means a wall. Just going to go back a couple of verses over here. We had the Jewish people went into the sea on dry land, and the waters were choma. Now that would be the correct way of spelling choma with that vav, which creates the o sound. But the way we have it in the second splitting, The waters are choma, but it's missing. Um, Choma is missing that vav. In fact, the way that word reads, if you don't know the vowels, is the waters were chema. They were like anger. In other words, the waters were threatening on the other side because they didn't really deserve. I don't know what merit they had. This is really what we have to explore. What merit did Datan and Aviram have that they actually, survived the death in Egypt and were allowed to cross the Dead Sea. The Red Sea or Reed Sea, and join the Jewish people. When in fact, as we'll see, it wasn't strategically such a good plan. They made a lot of trouble. Here is what the Baal HaTurim has to say. Sorry, I couldn't find the translation. Chema, anger, maybe not it's choma, but chema ktiv chaser. The word chema is written defectively, and that's because Hashem was filled with chema. He was filled with anger. So that's a very strange one. Now, here is a statement by the Maharal. And maybe that's going to put things in perspective. He says, in a fight between good and evil, warring sides must be balanced. So to keep things even, when Hashem created great leaders like Moshe and Aaron, he also chose to fashion equally compelling antagonists, names, you've guessed it, Datan and Aviram. And they kind of stand against, challenging, pushing, and giving them a hard time. Right. Earliest mention of Datan and Aviram. This is when Moshe is a young man. He comes out of the palace and he sees the travails and the suffering of his brethren. He sees and he is perturbed by it. And it begins here. The next day he went out. What happened the previous day? The previous day, he witnessed a fight between an Egyptian and a Jew. And the Egyptian was striking the Jew. And Moshe interfered, killed the Egyptian, buried him. It says he looked left and right, there was nobody around. Killed him. That was it. The next day, he comes out and he finds that there are two Jewish people fighting. Let me give you a bit of background. That actually links to two. Okay, the reason why I killed the Egyptians because the Egyptian was beating the Jew. What happened? The Egyptian was repeatedly violating the wife of this Jew, eventually he took it up with him, confronted the Egyptian. The Egyptian started beating him even worse, and it wasn't good. And Moshe got involved. The name of that man, the Medrash tells us, is Datan. He was married to this Mrs. whatever her name is. The sister of this woman is Aviram. Datan is arguing after this discovery that he's going to divorce his wife because he doesn't trust that this was completely, by force. And Aviram is now fighting with Datan over his intention to abandon his sister. Okay, so I'll just give you a bit of a background that they're quite very linked into the prologue to this story here. Moshe has killed the Egyptian, and he now sees the two Jews fighting. Now we know what the background to this fight is. And he says to the one who's lifting his hands, "Why do you strike your fellow?" And this is his response: "Say, who made you into a chief of ruler over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptians?" Moshe is frightened and thought, then the matter is known. Yeah, except here's the thing: only one person witnessed that murder, as we discussed, husband of the abused Jewish wife, Jewish woman. So here is what Rashi tells us about the identity of these two people. That's the first time they come up. It's based on the Talmud and the Darim. Datan and Abiram, it was they two who left over some of the manna. We'll get to it in a moment. But this is the very first exposure, of course, that ends up with Pharaoh hearing about it, and Moshe having to run away. So it seems that they went and informed. So they've kind of had this attitude of being a bit, on both sides, right from the beginning. Okay, Moshe goes to Midian. He's going to be there for a very long time, decades. Because as a youngster when he leaves Egypt, but he's 80 years old at the burning bush. So he literally lives with his father-in-law, marries his daughter Zipporah, and spends a lot of time. Eventually, Hashem appears to him at the burning bush and tells him, "Time to go back. I've got a mission for you." Um, and here, Rashi says, Fear heard about it. It was a Datan and Aviram who slandered and denounced him. But now, some years have passed, and Moshe needs to go back to Egypt. And this is what Hashem says to him: "Go back to Egypt, for all those who sought to kill you are dead." And this is at the end of the burning bush, and he's maybe dilly-dallying, a bit nervous about going back, because the nemesis there, the antagonists, Datan and Aviram are there, and Hashem says all the people who want to kill you are dead. Says Rashi, Datan and Aviram once again. They're actually alive. They'd come down in the world. They lost their property, and a poverty-stricken man may be regarded as dead. And you can see a lot of this discussion is happening in that Talmud. The Darim Rashi is just quoting from there. So again, we found Datan and Aviram. They've lost their money, they've lost their respect and their status, and therefore it's fine. You can go back to Egypt, which he does. What happens when Moshe starts fulfilling his mission? Yeah, he goes to Pharaoh. He says the Jews must be let out. Pharaoh says, no. You're only giving them these ideas in their mind because they're not working hard enough. We're going to make them work even harder. And as a result of that, they stop giving the raw materials to make the cement, the bricks, and things get much worse for the Jews. And the Torah relates to us that on the way out of Moshe and Aaron, they meet. These are the people who sticking up for the Jews, and they went to talk to Pharaoh and to say to him, please, why are you making it so difficult? May Hashem look upon you, punish you for making loathsome to Pharaoh and his courtiers, putting a sword in their hands to kill us. Those are Jews who've gone to represent themselves in front of Pharaoh and say, you're not fair in the way you're treating us. Any guesses as to which Jews would have access to Pharaoh's palace and feel they could be spokespeople for the Jewish people? There we are. Rashi says once again, and he bases it on the Darim once again. Those were the Datan and Aviram, just because of context. The people are quarreling and they're standing, aggressively against Moshe. So the Talmud says we're talking about Datan and Aviram again. Here they are, but this is not at the end of this week's parsha, where the manna starts to fall. And Moshe says the rule of the manna is that you take everything, you consume it that day, you don't leave any out till the next day. And if you do, then well, here's a consequence. They didn't. They tried, and they get infested. But who were those people who left some deliberately out? There we go. Based on Shmot Rabbah, Rashi says, Datan and Aviram. Once again, and still in the section of the manna which we're going to read this Shabbos Yeshua, it gets worse because it comes to Friday and they get a double portion and they're very confused. We actually put two challahs on the table on Friday, two kitkus on the table on Friday, and we call them lechem mishneh, or the double amount of food. And Moshe explains to them that God had said that on Shabbos there's no cooking, so you prepare your food today, and that's why you got a double. And you can leave food over until the next day, but tomorrow there will not be manna. So they did, and it didn't rot. Moshe says, no, you can eat it today. 6 days, You can gather it. On the seventh, there's not going to be any. And then some people, any guesses, went out on the seventh day to gather, but they found nothing. Who are the people? No, you've seen that before already. Who are those people? Rashi quoted it earlier on. Those were the people, and they went and deliberately put manna out, says the Medrash, in the fields. So the manna that they'd left, they kept some over, they put out, and they were going to, call Moshe a liar. And then it didn't work because the birds came and ate up all the manna. It didn't happen on the other days of the week, but on Shabbos it happened. In fact, there's a custom on this Shabbos to put some food out for the birds on Friday, to feed the birds, to thank them for having kind of saved the day, because Datan and Aviram were going to, call Moshe a liar, and they were able to, the birds kind of were on our side. This happens at a later stage. It's in the book of Bamidbar, and this is after the spies come back with their negative report about Israel. And one man said to his brother, let's head back to Egypt. In fact, Nitna Rosh, let's appoint a new head over ourselves, not just head back and go back to Egypt. Who are these people who are suggesting they should be appointed as new heads of the Jewish nation? Well, you guessed it by now. And then the last time they appear is in the rebellion of Korach, which is a very, very serious kind of mutiny rebellion against Moshe and Aaron's leadership. And there again, you'll find them in the first verse in the Parsha of Korach, saying, we part of this rebellion, we against Moshe, and we want to challenge his leadership. And that's the last time I think they mentioned by name in the Torah, but you get the thread, which kind of reinforces our amazing question. Why did they survive the death of the Exodus refusers? And how come the sea split for them? Like, what have they got in their merit? Well, the not Korach, but in Bahalotcha, the elders of the Jewish community are assigned. I'm a bit confused here with the order of the slides. Maybe I did this wrong. Here we go. Yeah, the wrong order. So Moshe eventually says to Hashem, I can't do this. I can't anymore lead the Jewish people by myself. And Hashem says, okay, we're going to establish a Sanhedrin. We're going to have 70 people who are going to help you. And who are these people going to be? And he uses his words, Ziknei ha'am v'shotrav. The elders of the people and the officers. A shoter is a soldier, a policeman. Where did we have these people? And Rashi says to us over here, you want them to be appointed. Who are they? They're going to be the people who were Shomrim or kind of Jewish. I don't want to call them kapos because they didn't act in that way, but they were kind of officers in charge of the Jews. But what happened was that they ended up taking beatings, but not doing their job, which was to force the Jews into the additional quotas of the raw materials and the bricks and so forth. Those are the people that are referred to as shoter, shotrav, the policeman we would call it in today's Hebrew as shoter. And that Rashi says are the people who are going to be chosen. And they ended up being the members of the Sanhedrin who would, because they had kind of taken the rap. So we got to go back now to get this in the right order. Yeah. Here we go. Hashem Pharaoh says, we're going back now by quite a few years. He says, no, go and gather your own stubble and straw and make yourself the brickwork just like you did before. And who ends up getting the beatings? the Jewish overseers, look at the word there, Shotrei B'nai Israel, Shoter, the policeman, right? Why have we not completed the prescribed amount of bricks, as you did previously? But they're taking the beating, but they're actually not passing it on to Jewish people. They're the ones who are suffering on behalf of the other people. And yeah, they then come to Pharaoh, and they say, "Why are you doing this?" And he says, "No, the reason is because you're trying to shirk the work, you're lazy, go and sacrifice to Hashem." But I'm telling you now, you're saying, go, we want to sacrifice to Hashem, just go, no straw, no raw materials, but still the same amount is expected of you. So then on their way out from Pharaoh, and this you'll recognize from earlier, they meet, um, Moshe and Aaron, and they say, "Hey, what have you done?" So we guessed it was Nadav and Avihu. We guessed it was Datan and Aviram earlier. Rashi mentioned them by name. He put proof that that's the case. They are the ones who are being beaten. I'm not sure that all of the Jewish policemen, officers, actually went to confront Pharaoh, but they did. And if you think about that, that's a huge, huge, huge merit. It did not earn them the fact that they became members of the Sanhedrin. Their subsequent behavior clearly showed that they were not, worthy of that. In the beginning they were still kind of sitting on the fence, and their personalities developed with the passage of time into that. Moshe says white, we say black, and that kind of went on right through the years and in the desert until I don't know at what point they were no longer powerful, but somehow they must have gotten their money back if they've got a revolving door to Pharaoh's palace over there. They must have been rehabilitated. That earned them survival in that what I call the plague of the Exodus refuses death, and that earned them the unbelievably difficult to comprehend singular treatment of having the sea split, especially for them. It's like the equivalent. Think about it in an airport when they've closed the doors of the plane, and the jetway is already being rolled back, and then suddenly somebody comes and says, "Hey, I still gotta get on that flight." Well, we know what the answer is going to be, and that's kind of what happened here. Is Hashem, made a special service for them, and now we understand the value of one Jew being prepared to take the pain of another, one person being able to suffer to save another person pain. We got a couple of minutes. I just want to share this kind of amazing epilogue. This depicts Elijah at Mount Carmel. Without going into too much detail now, but there's a challenge where the prophets of Baal, they are, they challenge to bring down fire to consume the offering with prayer alone. Elijah does the same on the other side, so that's the famous story. The epilogue of this is that the Holy Ari teaches us that the two animals that were used there at Mount Carmel by Elijah were a reincarnation, animal reincarnation of these two very unsavory characters, Datan and Aviram. Came back as cows, bulls, whatever it was, and did have the great merit, in a sense, of being offered as offerings and sanctifying Hashem's name in such an amazing way. So somehow they did get what they deserved in the end. I'm not sure that reincarnation into a cow is a particularly pleasant state for a human soul, but at least they got to end their lives even as cows, sanctifying Hashem's name and getting rewarded for whatever it was. So besides the survival in Egypt and the splitting of the sea, they also ended up, albeit in the behemoth form, giving their lives to Hashem. Thank you and have a good night.